Welcome to the Aviation Insurance Podcast, the podcast that helps aircraft owners and aviation businesses learn and understand the complex world of aviation insurance and risk management. From the basic principles of aviation insurance to risk management techniques and updates on the aviation insurance market, the Aviation Insurance Podcast is your guide to traverse the world of aviation insurance. Now, here's your host, Tim Bonnell.
Well, welcome to the Aviation Insurance Podcast, and today I want to continue looking ahead at our industry by looking at what we're doing today, what we're doing in the past, and looking ahead at what we're doing in another area of our sector that's here. It's been here for a while, and it continues to grow, and that's Unmanned Aerial Systems, which are important because they're doing a lot in the airspace now, very productive work for a lot of industries, but they're sharing that airspace with manned aircraft. Well, and so I was very excited to be introduced a while back to Josh Olds, who is the president, CEO, and co-founder of the Unmanned Safety Institute. And so I'm so honored to him to come here and join us today and kind of talk to us about that space of our aerospace and those safety initiatives and all of his experience surrounding that. So with that, Josh, welcome to the podcast.
No, thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, so just, tell myself and our listeners here just a little bit about your journey becoming the CEO of USI.
Yeah, so to keep it brief, I actually started in aviation. So I was multi-commercial instrument rated, had an A&P, so maintenance credentials, and I had just graduated from college, but this was in the 2008, 2009 era, and the whole aviation industry had just kind of dropped out, a lot of layoffs from the airlines, and I had gone to college to be a corporate pilot. So I ended up falling into the remotely piloted space. Textron, Unmanned, their remotely piloted division of Textron was hiring. They hired me in as a pilot technician, initially became an instructor. So that was my first foray into remotely piloted ops, was flying beyond visual line of sight on big, fixed wing aircraft for intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. And I found out pretty quickly that it was there was a lot of parallels to the aviation world, but there were so many differences. And it was like drinking through a fire hose. The first 6 months of that job was learning new things that I honestly had never learned about before. So fast forward, I ended up taking on an anti-piracy job. I flew remotely piloted helicopters for oil and gas in the Indian Ocean. We were a first response kind of helicopter operation. Again, a lot of parallels to aviation, a lot of lessons learned coming out of those operations, both technology lessons learned, human factors, personnel lessons learned, just all sorts of things. Coming back to the States, I was getting married, so I came back, actually worked at Embry-Riddle for a while, taught in their UAS program as faculty. And so had a very unique background, both operationally, fixed, flew, and then taught. And so that led me into co-founding USI in 2014 with a group of individuals, all from aviation, remotely piloted background. And the whole premise of Unmanned Safety Institute was bringing aviation safety principles into the remotely piloted world, because early on it was very clear that this industry there was a lot of alike to the aviation industry. There are a lot of differences, and those differences presented a lot of unique challenges to remotely piloted operations. And we've learned that the hard ways. And so coming from aviation, there was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, over 120 years of the right way to do things and keep things safe. And so we've really been focused on bringing that goodness from aviation into the remotely piloted space. I started on the operations front for USI, and then 2018 shifted into the CEO president role and really leading the company forward. And so I've been here for a decade.
Yeah, I was going to say happy 10-year anniversary there.
Thank you.
That's awesome. So it's exciting. Quite the journey. It's amazing how these different experiences kind of bring us to where we're at today. And so, you talked about, USI and your role there. What kind of safety services do you guys provide? What are the things you do as you serve the industry?
So we really look at three different pillars. Personnel training is probably what we're most known for at USI, which is education, training, and then we do safety-based certification. So it's third-party validated certification programs. That really helps from a workforce standardization perspective. So that's part of our safety promotion kind of component of the company. How do you educate, train to operate different kinds of technology? And then we focus on technology. Technology is both hardware and software. Primarily on the software front is what technologies can you use to manage your pilot proficiencies, the currencies, checklist usage, risk management practices, hazard reporting. And then lastly is organizational pillar. And in that category, it's safety policy. So documentation structure, what does that look like for a UAS operation? Vendor vetting, auditing, so audit preparation. We actually partner with IBAC. It's been a couple of years now, but on the ISBEO, the RPAS audit for training auditors that are going to audit to the RPAS standard that IBAC has. And so that's really a lot of aviation flight departments that are operating drone technology have started taking on, the desire to pull in RPAS into, and RPAS being remotely piloted aircraft systems, right? Bringing that into their aviation flight department so that if you already have an ISBEO stage 1, 2, or 3, you're bringing in RPAS as part of that ISBEO audit. It can look very different, how your RPAS operation is set up, documented, how you're implementing it. So we support that on the organizational front. And having an accountable executive inside of the UAS world, that's not a common thing. A lot of organizations have drone technology, but they don't necessarily have that organizational accountable executive that's really advocating and funding the safety plan as part of drone ops. And so that's something we're really taking on as kind of a grassroots model of educating corporations that, look, drone technology, they may be simplex under Part 107, but the reality is as companies are growing and they're starting to bring in bigger, more complex technology, it's very much a FAA-registered aircraft. It's in the national airspace. There's a lot of risk profiles that you need to be aware of as an organization just to ensure you're mitigating that as part of your deployment of that technology.
Yeah, it sounds like, basically you're outlining all of the components of a safety management system. So in addition to all the education and training, are you basically facilitating safety management systems for the UAS operators?
We are. And when you look at SMS, it can look very different, and again, I go back to Part 107. That was, in a lot of ways, I explain that as like a blanket. It was thrown over the industry and kind of band-aided. Again, it was a safety approach, to say, look, we're going to start with visual line of sight operations. That was in 2016. And so when you look at SMS and how it's implemented, looks very different within a Part 107 operation from a complexity perspective than it does with like a Part 91 waiver, drone operation, or Part 137 or 135 package delivery with drones. Like, drones are being used across a lot of existing FARs outside of 107 today. And so SMS becomes really important as you start expanding that footprint within your organization.
Responsive, reliable, unparalleled experience and expertise. These are the things that our customers repeatedly tell us, and fortunately for us, tell to their friends who they refer to us, then contact us to serve their aviation insurance needs. If you want to experience the same thing, please visit our website at www.aerisinsurance.com. That's www.aerisinsurance.com, or call us toll free at 844-422-0023. We look forward to serving you soon. Yeah, that kind of leads into my next question. We're in an exciting era. We've got, UAS has been integrating into the airspace for, a number of years. And now we've got, the introduction of the advanced air mobility, eVTOL aircraft movement. And so I guess my question would be, what do you anticipate being those key factors in helping ensure, safe and successful UAS operations today and into the future?
So I think a lot of it is education and training. It's helping educate an industry. And we often describe it as, if you look at the industry today, it's not just aviation. You have DOD that have been using drones since the 70s, 1970s. And the reality is you have Hobbyist Recreational, which is, the radio controlled aircraft, that culture. And then you have the technologist culture. And the technology companies like your Amazons, your Googles, building aircraft, operating under Part 135. But what you have is and I almost would call it a clash of cultures. You bring all these different groups into one industry, and it's a lot of tug and pull. it's tug and pull on aviation's very stringent, very rigid, very policy driven, right? It's all about safety. Technologist, RC, it's innovation. You're like, how fast can we go and how innovative can we be? And in a lot of ways, it's a perfect marriage between two groups that we see a lot of innovation in this industry, but there's a balancing act that has to take place. Like you need to be innovative, but at the same time, there needs to be processes and procedures to allow for repeatable and sustainable long-term operations. So I think, from what do I see from a need for the industry expansion and growth? It's standardization, and this is something that just reverberates every time we have conversations within the industry is standardization on the technology, standardization on the workforce programs. And that's, again, where USI is really focused its attention on building standardized frameworks for workforce all the way into beyond visual line of sight operations. And so it's a career field for a lot of individuals that are entering this space. This is what we're encouraging students in the secondary environment. I mean, we have some of our programs that have now pushed down. And again, we've been at this for 10 years, but they're now in middle schools, 7th and 8th graders completing industry certification, tied to safety-based operations. But their goal is to be an operator or a technician in remotely piloted world. And so when you look at some of the career fields available, having a standardized workforce as it feeds, and you mentioned advanced air mobility, a lot of the advanced air mobility companies, the manufacturers, are focused on single pilot operations initially. But a lot of their business models shift to fully autonomous aircraft, human over or human in the loop kind of operations. Really, they're remotely piloted aircraft systems in a lot of ways. And so when you look at how automation is impacting aviation, and then you look at insurance and kind of how is insurance looking at the market, that pilot in command becomes a very important aspect of that aircraft. They're part of that aircraft operation. And one of the hazardous attitudes that we teach, we train, we educate, but it is shared fate. And this is something that we learned pretty early on is, and again, not everybody likes that term, but when you think about it, it's a hazardous attitude. And when you have shared fate with that aircraft, if I'm a pilot, in my aircraft, I have a shared fate with that aircraft. Like that, I'm going to land it safely, right? And that's the goal. But in the remotely piloted world, one of the things we find from a training perspective is it's a human factors component where you don't always have a shared fate with that remotely piloted technology that's operating downrange, right? Because you're separated from it. You're operating on a computer screens and a control station, but that aircraft is downrange. It's just an image on your computer screen. You're moving map display, moving around. And so sometimes it's difficult to realize that, look, people, property, and aircraft around that aircraft that's operating in a 3D environment, you have a shared fate with that aircraft. You want that aircraft to land safely, fly safely. We all want that to occur. So teaching and educating that it's amazing to see, you throw an emergency into that operating shelter in the training environment. Some students, put their hands in their laps, and it's kind of this resignation attitude where it's like it's got an emergency, it's out there, I'm here. And so training and educating that there are some definite human factors components that are going to be tied to kind of the future of how we're operating this technology. How does automation play into that? And who's liable for the safety of that flight?
And as we, think about that, what comes to mind is, I'm assuming, and so this is really a question. So I'm assuming means I'm not sure, but most of your clientele, I'm guessing, are professional operators trying to do it the right way. And as we think about what are the obstacles to safe operations, I'm sure the question, for many pilots, for many aviators, aviation insurance professionals, is what about the hobbyist? What about the people that aren't trained and don't care? That just to what you alluded on the shared fate, they don't mind. Like what's that concern, and is that maybe the biggest obstacle to safe operations in this space?
So I would say that on a lot of the recreational flying, and again, today you can operate within a FRIA without remote ID, and with remote ID, all these aircraft are required to be operating outside of those FRIAs with remote ID compliance. So when you think about the learning curve, and I think a lot of this is knowledge. You don't know what you don't know until you know, and so when you look at that from a learning curve, I think the best we can do is grassroots approach to getting into education and teaching about the fact that, look, flying a drone is not going to Best Buy and throwing it up in the air. There is a real need for a level of training. And the FAA came out with Trust, and Trust certificate was basically an online program. You go, you complete it, and you can fly recreationally. It's a certificate program online. It's completely free. That was a good step in the right direction to say, look, if we're going to be flying with hobbyist recreational with aircraft under 250 grams or larger, there needs to be a program in place for anyone that's flying as a hobbyist recreationalist to understand that, look, there's a whole national airspace above you. As we add, and I don't know if you've seen the current numbers tied to drone tech, but 700,000 registered commercial drones in the national airspace. It's a lot of technology that's been registered commercially to operate in the national airspace. And so as that increases, which it will significantly over the next 5-10 years, obviously we want to encourage hobbyist recreational flying because that's a catalyst for engaging students, young adults in aerospace career fields. But to do that, it's being restricted now within certain areas of the country under FRIAs. And so I do think we have a bit of a growing pain there to really help structure what the future of the national airspace is going to look like, how individuals gain access to that airspace, and then from a professionalism perspective, investing in the safety cases. Because I would say even corporations inside of this space, again, they don't know what they don't know. And a lot of folks look at drone technology as simple technology, easy to fly, and a lot of it is. But it's the fact that we're stepping into the national airspace all over the country, all sorts of classes of airspace, and we now have LANCE authorizations. And so there's all these complexities that get thrown into how you operate the national airspace with remotely piloted technology. There are a lot of foundational skill sets. It's not everybody understands I know growing up, I grew up in rural agriculture, nothing about the national airspace. And so it's just one of those things where it's got to be a grassroots model of we're educating the fact that it's going to be very busy 400 feet and below, over the next decade.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I know the aerial applicators in particular out where you grew up were the ones that are maybe the most concerned and are certainly seeking ways to provide education awareness. I think, everyone's aware of the value and then the factor that, unmanned aerial systems are a part of life and they will be going forward. And so ensuring those safe operations are definitely in the best interest of everyone involved, including and especially those hobbyists if they want to keep doing it right. So hopefully more and more people buy in as you guys continue your efforts and the rest of the industry to promote safety. And so on that note, part of the aviation insurance industry here. And so what are some of the things that you see that aviation insurance companies can do to help improve and be a part of that safety initiative to lead to safer and successful UAS operations?
I really think it's promoting safe practices. It's underwriting risk, right? You underwrite a risk profile, really looking at the risk matrix, everything from ground risk, air risk. It's helping advocate for standards-based operations, especially as we're talking now about Part 108, is on the very horizon with the notice of proposal rules making, hopefully by the end of the year, that could become compliance-based rule by the end of next year. And so when you look at that, that's going to expand and really be focused on the operator, not the pilot, but the actual company deploying the aircraft. I think as insurance underwriters, brokers, I think the key is just advocating for safe practices. And safe practices could be, look, if you're operating bigger aircraft in higher risk environments, what are the standards? What are the workforce standards for who's flying the technology? And again, we talk about this all the time internally because every corporation has a different risk profile, which I think this actually creates a huge challenge for the insurance industry because how do you know what the risk profile looks like if you don't understand the technology component, like the redundancies, how they're operating that technology? What are the pilot training standards? Are they operating in class Bravo, or underneath the shelves, or are they operating in class Golf? Like there's so many hazard measurements and risk, measurements inside of that risk matrix, really identifying the risk profiles for organizations and what level do they need to be operating at from a standards-based perspective, I think is going to be key to long-term sustainable operations and really an industry that can flourish. Because one accident is going to set us all back, unfortunately.
Yeah, and, and unmanned aerial systems, a lot of the professional companies or the, larger drone UAS aircraft are insured in the aviation insurance market, but a lot of the hobby and medium ones, some people's homeowners insurance picks up, and so that probably has a little bit of a detriment to the communication of safety. And I think anytime there's a new technology, people have all kinds of mindsets about what's going to be wrong with it. I think the initial concerns just early on was the peeping Tom type of concerns, which, I'm sure have been there at some level, but not to any degree what people thought. And obviously, the risks like not having the shared fate and spoofing. But I know the technologies, continue to advance to, address those exposures and really in a quite impressive way. I had mentioned to you, you don't see too many accidents, from the FAA on some of the FAA reports. And I just saw this morning an accident that we discussed briefly. I think it happened yesterday, where it was, the drone was making power washing applications to a hospital building, I believe, and did that very successfully. And anyway, there ended up being a disconnect between the remote and the aircraft, and the remote pilot just wanted to address that by grabbing the vehicle and taking out the battery, and in doing so harming himself. So it probably, my assumption is it's all to what you're saying. There's still the human factor at play, and it's probably an ongoing thing. What are the other, are there any other challenges like that when you see losses that are occurring in the UAS space, accidents? Are they, what percentage is the human factor, someone making bad decisions, versus the technology?
I think the biggest challenge there is data. You mentioned there's not a lot of incidents reported by the FAA, but the reporting requirements are pretty, I would say, low from a reportability. Like what you have to report to the FAA, again, if it was an accident, mishap, or something like this where you caused injury, right? That's a reportable component. But I think from a human error perspective, there is a massive misunderstanding of the technology. So I would say a large component of current accidents that you see, there's a lot of human error, and it's because, whether you don't understand the electromagnetic spectrum, so a lot of lost communication errors, right? And losing communications with a remotely piloted aircraft, that's never a good thing. And if you don't properly set the emergency procedures and how that aircraft is going to respond in a lost communication event, which is typically what happens, because it results in incidents, accidents. And so it's really easy. Again, OEMs, pilot, it's the ongoing saga forever. Who was it? The technology? Was it the human error? Was it a human factors component? And so I think until we get better data defined, and again, this is an important part of the message that we help share, is look, every telemetry file, like we have the benefit in the UAS world that every black box telemetry file on the aircraft, you have every ounce of that information over time. And so you can track how many hours are on components, how many hours are pilot proficiency, currency. And so I think the more finite, the more standardized that we can track data tied to flight, the more accurate we're going to get as an industry in terms of, is it a technology issue, a reliability issue? Because again, we're not using type certificated components on a lot of these aircraft. They're aircraft components that are built, they're manufactured, but we need a lot better data behind the reliability of components. The human component is, there's all sorts of hazard domains with emerging technology because it's an expeditionary system. So you have an aircraft, a ground control station, a data link, payload. You have a lot of different ways operations can go wrong. So I would say that statistic is probably still up in the air. Is it more human error, or is it more technology based, these incidents and accidents?
Yeah, and it's so interesting. You mentioned some things that some people may not be aware of. What's a UAV versus a UAS and a drone, and you just mentioned, the unmanned aerial system is all those components you just mentioned. It's the ground unit, it's the aerial vehicle, which may be called the drone. It's a lot of things going into one, and And as you said, what really stood out to me was talking about, programming the emergency procedures, because what should happen in the loss of sight, most of those are programmed to just fly back to its station and land safely, right?
If they're programmed correctly, and there's different ways that you can return to land or return to home, or whatever the functionality is called. I've operated a lot of different systems over the years, and they're all different. The way, and that's why it's important to understand the aircraft you're flying, because that return to home logic is part of the autopilot system, and it can be different based on that airframe you're flying. But understanding how to pre-program that, and like what altitude is it going to fly home at, all of that is really important, especially if you're expeditionary and you move a vehicle, right, and that vehicle is now in the way of the landing spot, like you want to land that aircraft on top of the vehicle, and there's these things that happen in an operation that impact your aircraft, and so. Again, if you move vehicles or you move things on site, you have to update that lost communication logic or move the return to home point so that you're not creating a hazard that, wouldn't have been there if you'd pre-planned for that particular operation. And that's an important part of the messaging is, look, conducting a site survey, pre-planning, following checklists. That's all part of being an aviator, right? But again, coming in the world where you've got a lot of merged cultures, that's not necessarily second nature for individuals that are out there, have not come from aviation. And so that's a learning curve. It's something you need to teach and train, and that's what we've focused on. We built a 141 style training program specifically for the remote piloted market because the industry needs that workforce.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love how you bring that, any aviator, these are the things that should be there, but aren't, when you're bringing in other aspects and different components, it's not second nature. And so, that's really where it's advantageous to what you're doing. So we've talked about all the things you guys are doing, and obviously you can't do it all yourself. The insurance companies can participate in their own way. And, obviously you can overregulate any industry, but the FAA has been taking steps slowly over time to integrate unmanned aerial systems into their processes, into the airspace. From your perspective, where you sit, what else might they, you think they really need to do to, if anything, the safety and safe operations of unmanned aerial systems going forward?
I think right now, and again, when we created USI in 2014, the idea for beyond visual line of sight operations, like I can tell you that in 2014, I didn't think it'd be 10 years later, and we're still waiting on BVLOS ops. So I think the best thing right now is to get Part 108 operations out there. Again, you can fly beyond visual line of sight today under waiver. So the reality is there are ways, we do BVLOS training at USI under waiver with non-geospecific, but a compliance-based regulation will help open the doors to new operations, to corporate use of technology. It'll really be a catalyst for how this industry starts to unfold. We have barely scratched the surface in terms of what emerging technology can do and again, the reasons you use drones or emerging technology, you make money, save money, or reduce hazard hours. And we see a lot of corporate flight departments now deploying drones as part of their flight department because it's a cost offset. You take corporate flight department and now you're driving, revenue drivers or safety risk reductions within that corporation. It's now a cost offset to your corporate flight department. That's a really good value add to have as a corporate flight department that's never been there. So it's exciting to see how emerging technology is helping support the aviation industry. We advocate that corporate flight departments are taking on drone technology and emerging technology because it is a huge value add to the corporation. It's another facet of aviation. I often describe it as kind of like what the jet engine did, to aviation. It's a huge catalyst. It's the future for modern aviation. There's a lot of benefits. It's complementary to aviation, and that's where I think when we look at the space and we look at kind of what the FAA is doing, they've been right in, look, we have to have a safe national airspace. We appreciate that as the United States. And so when we look at the deployment of emerging technology, we want it to be done safely. And with Part 108 really putting the onus on the operator, I think insurance companies are actually going to help support that because they are going to put the onus on the operator from an insurance perspective. Again, the company deploying the aircraft to say, look, if your risk profile looks like this, you need to have a corresponding aviation ecosystem that looks like this, and that will really help, I think, mitigate the risk profiles, just like they did in the airline industry for the remotely piloted space. And so that's why I think for the FAA, the biggest thing is just getting the 108 regulations out there to really help the industry grow as a catalyst. And again, safety procedures, they'll be outlined as part of that regulatory structure based on that Part 108 operation.
Yeah, that hopefully they'll get that moving soon. Sounds very beneficial. Well, is there any questions that I should have asked you but didn't, or any closing thoughts you have on this topic today?
I don't think so. I think, my biggest comment about, again, coming from the world of aviation, and again, I was able to be at AIA conference in New Orleans. It's been several months now, but yeah, the excitement around emerging technology inside of aviation and kind of the impact that's having it's exciting to be in this industry right now, because emerging technology is presenting so many new opportunities, not just for the corporations deploying the aircraft. But think about this from an educational workforce perspective. If you're an eighth grader or you're in high school or you're in college, your opportunity to join the aviation industry, or let's say you're retiring from the airlines, like you now are looking at, what do I do next? I still want to be in aviation. Emerging technology is that low-hanging fruit. It's the ability for anybody to get into the aerospace industry that before never really had an opportunity. I mean, it's expensive to get into the aviation industry. It can be very expensive to get pilot ratings. None of that is cost effective, but it can be very cost effective to get into the emerging tech industry. And so it's exciting to be part of that, because it's not just aviation anymore. It's every career cluster. You look at electric utility, agriculture, every career cluster has a use case for emerging technology. And so it's presenting a lot of new opportunities for individuals to join the aerospace community. So again, the goal is safe, professional, ethical operations. And I think as an aviation industry, we need to drive that.
Absolutely, Josh. I couldn't agree more. And I appreciate you coming to the Aviation Insurance Association conference on behalf of the Education Committee and sharing some of your knowledge and just, thank you for what you're doing in this part of the industry. You've sit on both sides of manned and unmanned flight, and these safety initiatives benefits everyone, as you talked about. So if anyone wants to go and check out more about what you guys do at USI, how can they learn more about you? Where can they find you?
flyusi.org is the website, and then it has information on, we've got B2B programs, we have train the trainer programs, educational programs for academia. All of that can be found at flyusi.org.
flyusi.org. Well, Josh, thank you so very much for being here. A lot of great information. I'm excited to see what's coming. As an industry, these technologies are coming. They're part of the future. So it's important that whether the safety, whether the insurance side, we're all working together to embrace this and to help safe and sustainable operations going into the future. So thank you again just for being here and for sharing your time and wisdom with us today.
No, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. All right. Well, that's all for this episode. Join us again next time as we continue navigating the waypoints in aviation insurance. Till then, enjoy clear skies and unlimited visibility.
Thanks for listening to the Aviation Insurance Podcast. If you found this episode of value, please share it with someone who would benefit from this information. Don't forget to subscribe in your podcast player so you don't miss any new episodes, and to help our show have more impact. This episode is brought to you by Aris Insurance Solutions, your flight plan for navigating the turbulence of aviation insurance. For more information, visit arisinsurance.com. That is www.aerisinsurance.com. Disclaimer. These episodes are for educational purposes only, and due to the changing regulatory and legal nature of the business, some information may change over time. Having a well-educated and experienced aviation insurance broker on your team is an absolute requirement to success in business and for managing your aircraft and aviation business risks.